if I could do it all over again, would I vertically integrate? Sitting 23 years into this, and I question that all the time. I question everything we do all the time.
Right.
Were we appropriate going into this business? Were we not? Where I think we're being rewarded today is that I think the game in real estate is starting to change, where investors aren't seeking straight syndicators. They want vertically integrated platforms.
Quick favor before we jump in. It always surprised me that a large percentage of people who listen to this show regularly haven't yet subscribed. If you're a commercial real estate operator, investor, or builder who values conversations like this around deals, capital, and technology, please take 2 seconds and hit subscribe. It's a simple, free way to support the show. My commitment to you is that my team and I will continue bringing you higher level operators, stronger conversations, and real execution level insights every single week. Thank you. I truly appreciate it. Welcome back to the AI Edge podcast, where we sit down with investors, operators, and developers who are using strategy, systems, and smart execution to create real world results in commercial real estate. Today, we are talking about a topic that sounds great in every pitch deck, vertical integration, but often looks very different once you actually are running people projects and capital at scale. My guest today has lived the journey in real time. I'm joined by Steven Ludwig, founder and CEO of Coastline Real Estate Advisors. Over more than 20 years, Steven has built vertically integrated platforms that include Coastline Real Estate Advisors for multifamily and industrial value add investments and property management. Welcome to the show, Steven.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me. Exciting to always talk.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you being here, Steven. Let's start off with when people ask you, what do you do today in real life? How do you answer that?
Tell them I don't sleep. No, I think the real answer is a lot of what you described. Is I'm a vertically integrated family of real estate and operating companies focused on creating strong risk-adjusted returns for our investors and utilizing our platform to execute on that mission.
So you started on the industrial side at Colony, and then built Coastline, and then added renovation materials and capital platforms over time. What were the key moments where you shifted from being a traditional investor and operator to saying, we're going to build a fully integrated ecosystem?
So I think the critical path for us was when the GFC happened in 2008. I was in my early 30s, had a couple partners, and we were value add investors, and we were syndicating our deals, and we felt great about life. And overnight, more or less, I shouldn't say overnight, we kind of saw some of the signs and we're trying to exit out of assets. We weren't able to get out of all of them. And the carpet was ripped out from underneath us as, the entire capital markets crashed. And so did the values of our assets within our portfolio. And so while we had sold a number of deals and felt great about life and gotten promotes and bought houses and bought cars and, having a lot of fun, the next moment we were staring at a very different future where promotes were zero, our equity was at risk, and our income as purely a syndicator was little to zero. The third-party property management companies that we had were exasperated at what was happening in the market, and that exposed a lot of the cracks in their organizations. And when we needed to work 3 times as hard for a third of the, for 2/3 of the results, we just didn't feel like they were up for the task. And we knew that we had the energy and capability at that point, as we had learned enough over the previous 6 years that we were in business, that it was the right time for us, after much deliberation, to start our own property management business. And that not only gave us better control of our portfolio, and we saw overnight improvements in execution, but it also created a much needed and important lifeline through fee income. And so that was really the impetus. And then from there, we tacked on the other businesses. So we're doing a lot of value add apartment investing. And so within the property management business, we had built out a construction division that was doing our renovations in-house. The challenge was pretty simple. We could never figure out how much it costs to renovate a unit, nor could any of the previous third-party management companies tell us who were doing it in-house, because you would have employee A, B, and C working in units 1, 2, and 3, and you didn't know where to book the hours or how to book the hours, nor did they ever track them appropriately. And those guys would go to Home Depot and spend thousands of dollars, and you never knew exactly how many door pulls out of the 200 door pull purchase were going to units 1, 2, and 3. So what we decided was to take the renovation team within the property management group. One gentleman who ran it got his general contractor's license, and we started our construction company, Turnaround Solutions. And then Turnaround basically took on that responsibility. And so while we created a lot of work over at Turnaround, at Coastline Real Estate Advisors, we got one invoice for the total cost of renovation. And then we had to solve that issue over at Turnaround Solutions, which we did very well, not overnight for sure. And I would say the evolution from there was, once we were now controlling the renovation and buying a lot of building materials, we were at first just trying to move away from carpet, because carpet, there's no such thing as stain-proof, smell-proof carpet. And so what I had learned previous to us getting into the management business, I had a business degree. I understood accounting and finance pretty well, finance better than accounting. And one day I asked the third-party manager, I was like, where's all our cash flow? And they're like, Steve, we expensed $1 million of carpet on the cash flow statement, which shows up as an asset on your balance sheet, but that doesn't show up in your profit and loss statement. And the light bulb went off, like, I got to get rid of carpet. So eventually we started making our own vinyl plank flooring. And that then led us to figuring out, well, what other materials can we make? Fast forwarding, once we got large enough and we had 50,000 feet of warehouse and lots of construction teams, lots of materials, a friend of mine joined the company as a partner, and having a great background in selling products and a legal and a lawyer, he came up with the idea and said, well, why don't we split the building materials company away from the general contracting business? Because right now we're just white labeling the products and pushing them through how much construction we can do. We have such great products. Why don't we separate those two businesses, the products from the materials, and why don't we brand and package the products and sell the products to everybody? And so that was the birth of our building materials company, Tesoro Products. And it's an amazing value and service to our clients and to myself, we basically are cutting out all the middle people and selling direct to the user, developer, contractor, subcontractor, manager. And so what we essentially do are make great and unique products that are focused on highest quality, best price, fastest installation, longest durability. And so that business has done very well because it's a phenomenal value proposition. I benefit from it. Our clients benefit from it. It's a win-win.
That's amazing. Was there a specific deal or pain point that pushed you towards vertical integration, where you said, we have to own more of this value chain if we want to hit our returns and our timelines?
I think it's probably more being raised in Boston. Is not the biggest and toughest guy. And, at some point you find yourself in a bar in Boston and a guy bumps into you and you're like, he says, gives you that look, and in your head you think, I can take this guy. Right. In my mind, we were getting bumped around by property management companies. We were getting bumped around by general contractors, and we were getting bumped around by building materials supply company, where, at the end of the day, we were just trying to solve problems that we had. We would go to a big box retailer that many people use, and we'd order a list of supplies, and the box would show up at the property, and you unzip the box, and 60% of the materials you ordered are there, and you call your rep, and you're like, hey, where's the balance of the materials? And the response was always, well, they're out of stock, they're on back order, they'll get there when they're available. Well, that doesn't solve the real-time issue of having your contractors on site, your labor on site, who need those materials to install. Now everybody's scrambling to find replacement materials, not identical to the ones in your spec list. You would end up with this kaleidoscope of materials throughout a property, which doesn't translate to operational efficiency year by year. And that the impetus almost to that was when we started off making flooring was we would go, before we made flooring, we would go to the flooring installer and we'd say, this is the, almost like the color of behind us. We got 100 units. We're going to do 10 a month, and we want you to install. And by month 3, they're like, we're out of that color of flooring. not only did the building have multiple different colors, but as the years would roll by, you couldn't find the replacement for those, the match for that color. It was out of stock. So when we made flooring, we're like, hey, let's start with like 5 colors and let's always keep them in stock. So if you need 2 planks or 200 planks, we're not replacing entire floors. We're just replacing a few planks. There were a lot of different little items that added up to us over time, but ultimately we were trying to optimize the operations.
Very interesting. Excellent. The term vertical integration gets used a lot in marketing, but it means very different things in practice. When you talk about being vertically integrated across next gen, apartments, Coastline, turnaround solutions, Horacio, Lenta, what does it actually mean day to day for you?
It means that we have a lot of fires to put out, maybe more than others. I mean, look, building businesses is hard. Being entrepreneurial is hard. You do have to wear a lot of hats and spin a lot of plates. Maybe it's, going back to, being born in the 70s and raised in the 80s, nobody was diagnosed with ADHD. You were just someone that, squirmed in their seat and maybe lost focus at times. And as you get older, maybe those challenges that you had in school became superpowers as you were older, because when I look at my schedule any given day, the lineup of phone calls is land entitlement to solving a construction problem, to a value add acquisition, to a refinance, to a new property management, onboarding of a new property, to shipping issues in the building materials, to sales phone calls, to peers in the industry on building material. I mean, there's so many different hats that I wear day to day. Some people that might drive them crazy. They like to tackle one problem and run a marathon with it. For me, I thrive in the chaos.
That's what makes you a great entrepreneur.
You got to play to your strengths, not your weaknesses.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about the upside first. So, from your experience, where does vertical integration truly create an edge that you could not get if you just stayed lean and outsourced everything?
Sure. I would say first and foremost, cost and timing. When we had third party management, we used to say overseeing the team felt like slapping somebody else's child, right? And so that's not a comfortable situation to be in if you're a parent.
Sure.
I can say I've never slapped somebody else's child. Maybe I've wanted to over the years, but I've never done it. I've learned that, not smart. So the controlling of cost and timing is critical, right? I have had situations where you're looking at an accounts payable spreadsheet, and one day the balance is $100,000, and the next day it's 300,000, and the third party management company says, "Oops, there were $200,000 of bills that were buried in a drawer," and it's like, how does that happen? No one notified us that you were, replacing HVAC units, and those are real issues that happen when it's your employees and you have the controls over, all the expenses that are happening. You have tighter controls. You have more visibility. And from a timing perspective, you're not asking somebody else's employee to deliver a message to one of their employees to execute on something. So we just found that we were cutting out a lot of wasted time, a lot of expense fat across the board, and it's worked out very well for us.
Amazing. Can you give us a concrete example where having your own construction and material platform or your own financing platform directly changed the outcome of a deal, either in timing, returns, or risk?
Sure. We bought a project in the South Bay of LA. It was 3 buildings. It was 506 units, and the permitting was an incredible challenge, as the local municipality was, putting up roadblocks left, right, and center. But being the general contractor on it, we were dogged in finding a solution, and that probably saved us, you know, 20% alone from the unit interior renovation budget. And then most of these units were like 2 bedroom, 2 bath, 1,100 square foot townhomes. And we were just finding solutions on how to create the highest quality renovation at the best cost, the fastest time, the best durability, the highest rental potential. And, we ended up making a lot of money on this project, but ultimately it was the execution. It was being, on site every single day, managing the renovation, managing the inspectors, managing the municipality and controlling the costs and delivering a product in that marketplace that no one had ever seen before. And now, as we're in that project 8 years later, the durability of it is spectacular. So our operating expenses are incredibly low at turnover, which has continued to benefit the project for many years.
Amazing, Steve. So, on the flip side, building multiple companies, teams, P&Ls is not free. So, where have you found that vertical integration can actually become a drag if it's not managed carefully?
That's a great question. I think the battle that we candidly have day in and day out is not spreading yourself too thin. So the only way to succeed is to have a fantastic team. Like any company, you can have a great business plan, you can have a great product, but if you don't have a great team, you're not going to succeed. You're not going to succeed. And so we pride ourselves on having, phenomenal business partners. We have a phenomenal team, and that's really what makes it go.
Amazing, Steve. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see other sponsors make when they're trying to build everything in house too quickly?
In today's world, everybody wants things to happen so fast, the easy buck, right? Scaling multiple businesses simultaneously, first and foremost, it ain't easy. It's the antithesis. It's incredibly hard. And you're going to get punched in the face. You're going to trip. You're going to make mistakes. And you just have to constantly be willing to work through everything, you know, make the best decision you can. You're going to fail at times. And, how you handle those mistakes and come back is critically important. If I could do it all over again, would I vertically integrate? Sitting 23 years into this, and I question that all the time. I question everything we do all the time. Were we appropriate going into this business? Were we not? Where I think we're being rewarded today is that I think the game in real estate is starting to change, where investors aren't seeking straight syndicators. They want vertically integrated platforms. And so we're feeling like our hard work is coming, it's coming to fruition in a monetary fashion, and getting rewarded for it. So, I just, at the end of the day, hard work. That's something, I live by, teach my children hard work. Can't replace it.
Fantastic advice. Steve, how do you keep each business line sharp and competitive instead of just saying, we're going to use our own company no matter what, even if the market has a better option?
Yeah. Again, I think it's holding everybody accountable. Have there been times where on the construction side, years ago, there were some operational issues and some hiccups, and we started using outside contractors. And, the message was clear. We're going to use whoever is going to give us the best product and pricing. And I think that was a true wake up call. And, everybody on the team had to, we had to tear some things down and rebuild to get to a better place. And so I think at the end of the day, yeah, you can never be closed minded. And, our companies, while they're, part of one family, they independently operate and they have to succeed. And if they don't, then they won't get, our own business. And I certainly wouldn't want to pitch them to somebody else, to get their business.
Excellent, Steve. You're managing over 70 professionals across investments, property management, construction, materials, and finance. What have you learned about building and leading teams when you're running a platform with so many moving parts?
I think you missed a one. I think we're probably closer to 170 professionals. Well, I've learned a lot. Managing people is difficult. The state that you're managing in. I mean, we're in California. California certainly doesn't make it easy. I think if there's one thing I would share, hire slow, fire fast, right? The person that you interview is not always the person that you end up hiring. And, when you hire somebody great, it's so rewarding, but nobody is 100%. And I think, uh, bad employees can fester and be cancerous within your organizations. And, California makes it very hard to fire somebody. But sometimes, whatever the pain you might have to go through is worth it, because the organizational damage that one person can do is extreme. And on the flip side, the organizational improvement that a great employee can bring is outstanding.
That leads me to my next question. How different is the culture inside the Coastline versus Turnaround, Solutions versus Terrazzo? And what have you done to keep everyone rowing in the same direction?
Boy, that's a great question. I definitely think that each organization has their differences and similarities, right? I think given that My partners and I sit at the helm of each one of the organizations. Our personalities shine through the various entities. So there's a lot of connectivity from that perspective. And obviously, they're all at times working together. So there are differences and similarities in the cultures, which I think is great. And, what we always preach is while we're different companies, we're one big family. So be independently you, but know that our interests are aligned.
That's amazing. So, on that topic, when you're hiring leaders for these different lanes, what are you looking for that tells you this person can handle the chaos, complexity, and vertically integrated shop?
Sure. One of the things and that's a great another. You have great questions, man. Great questions. I love it. I've moderated plenty of panels, and you're on it. Gosh, you keep me on my toes. I respect that.
I'm prepared,
Cool.
Steve.
So you're no rookie here. I love it.
Did my homework.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. One of the things I think as an athlete, team sports is a big part of my life, and I think that gives you so many traits that translate well into the business world. And so, if I look across our organization, we have a lot of athletes. Not saying collegiate or pro, but people who grew up playing a sport. And I think from a perspective of teamwork, communication, winning, losing, hard work, having that competitive fire in you from sports can translate really well into the business world. And so I think if there's just an underlying theme to me, someone who's an athlete and has a competitive nature, don't have to be Michael Jordan,
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady, there we go. But, that's a perfect, he's the perfect example, right? Didn't get all the fanfare, low draft pick, hard work, ran a team well, developed himself, developed his mind, constantly improved, take your opportunities, make the most of it.
Nobody's seen that coming, right? When he was in Michigan, he was good at Michigan, but nobody's seen him become who he became.
I never heard of him until he stepped into a playoff game.
Did he take over for
Drew Bledsoe.
who was
Drew
Bledsoe?
Bledsoe. Yeah.
Bledsoe
Drew
got hurt.
Bledsoe. He got cracked in a game against the Jets, and in came Tom Brady, or not the playoffs, but at the end of the season. And the rest is storied history.
Amazing. You're
Yeah.
very focused on South Bay and coastal California generally. So, which is about the highest barrier as it gets, right? So, you have talked publicly about covering land plays and projects like Granada and Lawndale, where you're usually buying income today and planning a denser future use. So, how do you think about entitlement driven value creation as a part of your strategy?
Sure. I think big picture, as someone who did value add for several decades, I still do value add. And, it can be lucrative, but it also has its challenges, right? In California right now, there's a lot of legislation, just like you're seeing in New York. Rent control is growing, the restrictions are growing. It's more difficult to operate. Expenses aren't slowing down, but you have caps on rents. That's a tougher situation. And as I look at California and many places in the country, but especially California, especially Southern California, and especially the South Bay, you have a tremendous housing shortage. So do I want to continually take workforce housing and increase the rental pricing on that? Or do I want to add to the supply of the housing stock? That's basically where that starts. And, in a perfect world, which we're doing, the world's not perfect, but, we're executing on both strategies.
Amazing, Steve. When you take an industrial or commercial site and move it through the rezone to entitlement into hundreds of apartments or townhomes, what does that look like in your world in terms of timelines, capital structure, and risk?
So several months ago, I'll share a story. Several months ago, a dear friend of mine that I grew up with in Boston, her dad's a very successful real estate developer. And he and the family are in my neck of the woods in San Diego. And I happened to go and join them for dessert at the end of their family dinner. And I looked at him, and this gentleman is in his mid 80s today. And I said to him, I said, you've given me so much great advice over the years. I've been following in your footsteps more recently, getting into the land entitlement and development game. I feel like I should have come to you 4 or 5 years ago and gotten some advice from you, because boy, I've learned through hard knocks. And he looks at me very kindly, and he gently puts his hand on my cheek, and he goes, Steven, you got to eat a lot of shit. As I reflected on the previous 4 years of entitling projects, I was like, Boy, I wish I had had this conversation at the onset because it's true. Land entitlement in California is really hard, but really hard has distinctions. There are discretionary projects and non-discretionary projects. And I have done both. And I can tell you, I will never, ever, 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 and I could, if we had 6 hours, I'd keep saying ever, I will never do a non-discretionary project again. It's just not worth it. Life is too short. Discretionary projects, have a far greater chance and less roadblocks to success. And I think that's just a real key distinction for, certainly that I've learned and for anybody else that's thinking about entering the space.
Wonderful advice. So, how does having in-house construction and material platforms change the way that you underwrite and execute those kind of projects?
Again, cost and time. We know that we can renovate 20% cheaper and have a better product that's going to result in higher rents, lower expenses during the course of our hold period, and shorter renovation timelines. Is it perfect? No. Construction's never perfect. Whether we're doing it or another general contractor's doing it, mistakes are going to happen. Things are going to get delayed, but it's just going to be better with us.
Absolutely. Let's talk to our audience. Most of our audience is a mix of operators and capital. From investor side, when you sit with a family office, RIA, or a high net worth group, and you walk them through the structure, what are the reactions you hear most often?
What we do is there's a lot of people out there that are investing. I think everybody can appreciate our vertical integration. I think our investors are also smart. And like some of the questions you ask, how do we keep you honest? How do we know that your pricing is competitive in the marketplace? And so I think walking them through and showing them the examples is critical. I think from a deal structure perspective, I think it depends on what type of capital you're talking to. And I think that there's enough precedent out there to know what people are looking for. So the way you're going to talk to or syndicate a group of deal to high net worth investors, they have one set of priorities. A family office may have a separate, and an institutional investor something totally different. And so I think just, our deal experience, having done, over 100 projects at this point, investments, we have a pretty good understanding of what people want. An institution, generally isn't tax motivated. A family office or high net worth individual is. An institution, for example, will never tend through an exchange. So that's not part of the documents. An institution will, in general, if it's a value add investment, they're 3 to 5 year hold. Family office or a group of high net worth investors, they may want a longer term hold and be more cash flow than IRR driven. So I think at the end of the day, our experience and track record and history, we know what people want. So it's really kind of modifying based on the current environment a little bit. But we've done things pretty much the same way for a long time.
Amazing. So, how do you structure fees and economics so that investors feel like you're aligned across different entities, that they're not just paying markups all along the value chain?
Sure. It's a great question. I think everybody's sensitive to fees. For us, oftentimes we will roll our fees into the deal. And I think that gives people a lot of comfort. I think anytime you're taking out a lot of money up front, that's an uncomfortable situation. We're always going to put our money where our mouth is. So I think obviously the more you invest, the more comfortable investors are. From a fee perspective, we're always market. There's no excess property management fee. We're always less expensive on the construction front. The building materials adds to that as well. So I think that's critical when you're dealing with investors. On the institutional side, they're setting the market. At the end of the day, they're telling you what they're going to pay you for property management, and then we're not changing that very much on the private side. And candidly, most of our investors have been doing it for a long time as well. So they're reading through the pro formas and the operating agreements. And given none of our stuff sticks out because it's in line with market, those aren't typically conversations where we're having any pushback. It's more, why do you like this investment? Why do you like this market? What are your concerns, right? What's the worst case scenario? What's the base case, right? And nobody really cares about the best case, ourselves included. That's the gravy that you may or may not get.
Excellent, Stephen. This show is called The AI Edge. So, I would love to touch a little bit about systems and technology. So, when you're running multiple platforms like
Oh,
this,
no, wait, I'm gonna interrupt you. I'm gonna
yeah, go
interrupt you
for
for
it.
a second. Apologize. I think the part that people probably should focus the most amount of time on, whether you're an LP or a GP, is what happens when things go wrong,
Mhm.
right? You need a capital call. if you have to refinance. Like right now, there's a lot of challenges in the real estate market as interest rates are up. Do we have some properties that we're refinancing and where we've pulled out a lot of cash over the years? And hey, you know what? We might have to do a cash in refinance. We do. And as we've evolved over the decades, some of our older operating agreements aren't what they should be. And so that creates some challenges. And I think that people generally, especially newer businesses who are getting in there and now to me especially in California, it's a great time to be buying as assets are heavily discounted compared to historical prices. It's pretty obvious, right? Now, the projections might look super rosy for the next, 3, 5, 10 years. But at some point, if you're holding assets long enough and you're going to make mistakes along the way, it's going to happen. You just have to really make sure that your documents reflect what to do in the worst of times as they do reflect how to distribute money in the best of times. I just wanted to add that.
That's fantastic. I appreciate that advice. And my listeners are definitely going to be giving a lot of value from that. So thank you for that, Stephen. So the show is called The AI Edge. And so I'd love to be able to touch a little bit about systems and technology. So when you're running multiple platforms like this, where does data, software, and even AI actually help you manage better? And where does tech more buzz than substance?
Another great question. I think, just on a personal level, regardless of the business, some of the softwares just for my email system, right? That's giving me notifications through my email, what's marketing, what you need to respond to. I've been testing Fixer AI on my email. Is it groundbreaking? No. Is it helpful? Yes. Is it worth the cost? TBD. Copilot, have Copilot at times, that just saves a phenomenal amount of time, which is great. Writing quarterly reports to investors, market updates, et cetera. Was I a good English student? I think so. Edgar Allan Poe, definitely not. So I'll take all the help I can get.
Copilot makes you sound like Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah, sometimes too much like Edgar Allan Poe, and it becomes obvious, right? So I think throughout each one of the businesses, on the property management side, it's very software technology heavy. And the different softwares that we use are all now building different types of AI into their platforms, all the way from the site level, AI leasing agents, after hours, phone calls, et cetera. And that's all getting better month by month, which is great. I think on the construction side, I can't tell you that the software we use has really evolved that much. Candidly, I'm not that involved in that software, but I certainly know that we still do a lot of things the way that we've been doing them. I think estimating softwares are coming out and getting better and tracking what you've done historically. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. On the building material side, we have a full ERP system, which is pretty amazing. On the lending platform side, on the Beleta side, we're doing some really cool things with AI that helps you compare, you know, term sheets and all the documents and summarizing and taking hours and hours of work and condensing it either from comparing stuff to understanding, key points in the documentation. It's pretty remarkable. So, I mean, I'd say across the board, we're not necessarily building out custom AI softwares for ourselves. I certainly see everyone post on LinkedIn and, they've got something new and something cool and build this out. I just don't have the time and energy for that. So typically with software, I'd say whatever's prepackaged and will fit my business well is what we're going to utilize. I would say, again, another tidbit. Years ago, I love Shark Tank. I'm watching Shark Tank and two guys come up and they're pitching the sharks about some security software they have. Cuban's digging in and he's like, I don't see anything proprietary to what you do. I could just hire a couple of guys and pay them a couple grand and create, a better product. And Cuban says to the guys, which one of you is the software developer? And one guy says, I'm an investment banker. And the other one says, I'm a cop. And Cuban says, so, okay, let me take a guess. Or he goes, the next question he asks, how much have you invested into this company? And the investment banker guy says, I put in $3 million, to which all the sharks go, whoa. And Cuban looks at him and goes, look, you guys got taken by software developers. They saw you from a mile away, right? A cop and an investment banker with no programming experience that built you for millions of dollars. And you got something that's not even that tech savvy and certainly not unique or proprietary. And listening to that, I was like, I'm never building a software platform because I don't know how to code. And you know what? We just, even though I know that in one of our businesses, we tried to build a little thing, a scan gun with our own software and 30,000 bucks down the tube. And we threw it away and we went back to the prepackaged, scan gun.
Interesting. No, that was a great story. As far as standardizing reports across the 100 plus partnerships, are you using AI for anything about that?
I mean, in terms of the property management softwares, in terms of the financial reporting, obviously that handles the standardization. We have a web-based investor portal that handles a lot of standardization. So I think, and then the property management software that we bought or bought the investor portal that we were utilizing. So that was a stroke of good luck. If I had, probably one of the things I actually want to do is to hire somebody to figure out all the collaboration or, benefits of that now merged business and how we can better utilize it. But that's a lot of time and energy. And it's just one more thing on the to-do list on how to optimize the softwares that we're already paying for.
How about tracking project level performance and construction progress using AI for that?
Boy, that's a great question. On the construction progress, probably no.
Okay. These, these are
On
things that are
the
possible.
What's that?
These are things that are possible.
Well, see, there we go. Something for us to talk about.
Fantastic.
Um, uh, and on the property management side, I don't think I could answer that.
Okay. Forecasting cash flow or capital needs?
No,
No.
not using AI.
Using data for acquisitions and pricing decisions?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. How about as far as lead gen or underwriting?
Underwriting, no. We have our own proprietary models that we build out and we stick to. It's our, I'm not going to call it a secret sauce, but it's how we look at things. And, we're pretty comfortable with that side of it. Yeah. Boy, I'm thinking through the different businesses and all the different softwares and,
So many.
it's, they're good questions. They're real questions.
Excellent.
I think with any software,
Mm.
implementation is always a challenge. And so it's like, it's almost like employees, like slow to adopt, and quick to terminate when it doesn't work well.
If you stripped away all the fancy language and just focus on operations, what are one or two systems or dashboards you consider non-negotiable for running a platform of your size?
Hmm.
Got you thinking.
I mean, everything's negotiable. Everything's negotiable. Look, I think it's garbage in, garbage out. So no matter how good your softwares are, it's really about the quality of the data that's getting put in. And so I think, first and foremost, having great people and talents is non-negotiable, and tech packages are all negotiable.
Excellent. A lot of listeners are running small, mid-sized shops and might be thinking, should we build our own construction company or own material company or our own lending arm? From where you sit today, how should an operator decide when to integrate a function in-house versus when to keep it outsourced and just find a great partner?
Sure. I think it depends on what your goals are. If you're talking property management, every minute you're spending on property management, you're not spending time on new acquisitions or capital raising, right? And that goes the same for every business, right? So again, if I could do it all over again, would I have gone down the path I did? I don't know. I question it all the time. We just happen to and find ourselves in this position, enviable position of having a vertically integrated platform. But it's not for everybody. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and missteps, a lot of joys and success as well. So I think it depends on what your goals are. If your goal is to scale to, 10,000 units as fast as possible, then stay solely focused on that. If your goal is to, maintain strong operational control, you probably want to hang on to the reins, and that will slow you down from getting to 10,000 units as fast as you can. I think the benefit of today is that all the technology that is there and all the information that's out there is far better than when we started vertically integrating in 2008. And for us, we were taking documents that, we liked from the various companies we worked for. There was no PDF converter. So you sat there, looking, I'm a two finger, maybe a 7-finger typer. And so, we're typing out, 30-page lease agreements word by word. there weren't anything standard. Now it's a different world today. So, do you have the benefits of information and technology better than ever? Of course. Is that going to help expedite some of the things you want to do? Of course. So I think also, again, everybody has their tastes and preferences, right? If you hate property management, don't go into property management. You're going to be bad at it. If you hate construction, same thing.
Excellent, Steve. What thresholds matter to you? Is it deal volume, geography, control, or talent, or something else?
Quality of life. Quality of life. I mean, again, do what you love. If you love traveling and going to different cities and, that's your cup of tea, if you love putting a suit on and doing the dog and pony show, or do you love, digging trenches in your first fourplex that you bought and, figuring out how to lay a pipe and again, I think you have to understand yourself, what you enjoy doing, what you don't enjoy doing, and play to your strengths. Happiness is key.
Happiness is what matters the most.
We're not our parents, we're not our grandparents. And I think people, were raised in families and were conditioned to certain ways. Um, you know, you got to do what makes you happy, not to do what makes other people happy. That doesn't, like for me, my happiness isn't, living on a sidewalk smoking crack. That's not what makes me happy. My happiness is being with my family, working with, my partners and employees, uh, succeeding, doing fun deals, building companies. I take great pride in the number of employees we have and how we treat them. That's my happiness. Am I the biggest real estate owner, operator, developer out there? Far from it. Am I the smallest? Far from it. I'm in my happy spot. Still see a lot of opportunity and a lot of growth. As we're coming out of probably really tough 4 or 5 years in California, and so we're optimistic, we're energetic, we're excited, and that's it's a great place to be.
That's beautiful. If you were advising a young sponsor doing their first few deals, what would you tell them not to integrate too soon?
I would say it depends on the size of the deal. For me, my first deal was 170 apartment units. If I had to try to take on the management of that, it would have been a disaster. If your first project is a fourplex, you should 100% manage it yourself. So again, be realistic in what you can do. They're owning real estate has its risks, has its legal risks, whether it's a apartment building, an industrial building, a retail building. I mean, they all have their set of risks. And in the course of having a career in real estate, I used to, the world of litigation is real, especially in California. And for 14 years, I'd never been sued, and call it a partnership level. We had some tenant lawsuits, eviction. It was all eviction. And then, as the deals got bigger and the capital behind the deals got bigger, the lawsuits got the lawsuits got bigger. And anybody can sue and you have to defend, and that's time consuming and costly, and it takes the anxiety of it is real. So I just I tell people, like, first and foremost, be aware of the legal environment that you're operating in and cover all your bases, because at some point you're going to get sued.
Excellent advice. For someone 10 to 15 years behind you who wants to build something similar, Steve, what mindset do they need to survive the cycles and keep growing through them?
Like, I think you have to be aggressive. I think you have to be cautious. I think you have to find a healthy balance between the two. There's certainly plenty of syndicators that went, gangbusters in, the early 2020s, and they are paying a painful price. We saw a lot of opportunity and ability to just pump cash out there and buy. But, we also saw prices rising, and our experience said, hey, we saw this before in 2005, 6, 7. Let's pull back. If we're going to buy something, let's be super picky. So I think that investors sniff out very quickly somebody who's desperate to do a deal.
Amazing, Steve. Steve, this has been incredibly valuable. You've taken vertical integration from inside a slide deck to real operation systems and have been honest with both advantages and the weight that you put into the platform. For people who want to learn more about Coastline, Next Gen Apartments, Terrasso, or your current South Bay projects, where's the best place to connect with you online?
I'd say look me up on LinkedIn and shoot me a DM, and I'll gladly respond.
Fantastic. Perfect. So we'll drop that link in the tags of the show notes, including your multifamily, private equity, and family office crowd that follows your work. Steve, thanks again for coming on and breaking down the real pros and cons of vertical integration and multifamily and industrial from someone who actually runs it at scale. This has been the AI Edge podcast. If you've gotten value from this episode, share it with another operator or family office who is wrestling with how to integrate and how they should be. We'll see you again on the next episode. Thank you, Steve.
This was fantastic. Thank you so much. Your questions were thought provoking and interesting. So I really enjoyed the session. Thank you. Happy holidays.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Steve.